Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Joining me on the podcast today is Julie Muhn, a research analyst here at Finovate who's been with us for quite some time. Julie has seen an incredible amount of Finovate and fintech demos over the years, and I'd love to welcome her to the podcast. Julie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. I'm glad to be here.
So for people who aren't aware of your work, who haven't been reading the Finovate blog, can you start with just kind of a quick introduction about who you are and what you've seen of the industry?
Yeah. So I think my technical title is Senior Research Analyst at Finovate. I've been with Finovate for 9 years now, kind of head up the Finovate blog and the research side at Finovate, which basically just kind of keeps tabs on not only news in the industry, but also different trends in the industry. So along with writing the Finovate blog, we also contribute to reports and also speak at events and just are responsible for talking to industry experts about what's going on in the industry so we can bring the latest and greatest trends to the conference.
Yeah, well, I think certainly you're very successful at that. And what I wanted to talk about today is a recent article that you wrote talking about deepfakes in fintech. And I have to say, it's a pretty scary article. There are a lot of really worrying signs in there that the financial industry isn't really ready to deal with this new threat. I think most people are kind of generally aware what a deepfake is, but can you start by talking about why the financial industry in particular is so open to deepfake attacks right now?
Yeah, so it certainly is open. So when you think about deepfakes, a lot of people just think about deepfake videos, which is certainly one side of it. There are also audio deepfakes, which I think are more of a threat to financial institutions. But when it comes to fintechs, deepfakes can threaten, they can create fraudulent onboarding when it comes to videos. So fraudsters can use a video to pose as someone else to kind of get past liveness detection gates when it comes to logging on to someone else's account. They can also create new synthetic identities to create real accounts under a fake name, a fake person. And when it comes to audio, people can, log on via phone to someone else's account to convince others to create fraudulent payment authorizations or money transfers, and also impersonate business leaders to convince their employees or followers to take nefarious actions. So, yeah, those are kind of the basic three.
Yeah, I think most people think of deepfakes, they think of video first, right? There's some highly publicized examples, and there's obviously people who are concerned about it from a political standpoint. We can make our leaders do and say things which they didn't actually do and say. The audio one is one that I was really kind of surprised to read about. But in many cases, I think, as you said, that might actually be the greater threat. You mentioned in the article a specific incident that actually was reported on in, I think it was the Wall Street Journal. Can you talk about that just to put some real examples behind this?
Yeah. So back in last March, there was a fraudster used a voice-based deepfake to impersonate a CEO of a UK-based energy firm. So the fraudster called posing as a CEO to one of the CEO's employees to transfer about $250,000 to one of their suppliers. And then the fraudster moved that money to a bank account in Mexico. And the fraudster still hasn't been caught. The interesting part is the fraudster attempted to make a second transfer and reportedly called the same employee to try to make that transfer, but the employee was on the phone with the real CEO during that call.
Oh, man.
So that one didn't work out for them. The guy, the employee figured it out and obviously was able to stop that one. But yeah, the first transfer was successful and the guy still hasn't been caught.
Well, and it sounds like the second one would have been successful as well, were it not for that rather unlikely set of circumstances where he happened to be on the phone in that kind of like sitcom style confusion. So this actually brings me to another piece that you had mentioned in the article. You quoted a stat that only 28% of UK financial institutions have a plan in place to deal with deepfakes, and potentially more worrying than that is the 13% had never heard of the term deepfake. Obviously, that's pretty distressing. What do you think it's going to take to get more companies engaging with solutions here? Do we have to wait for a major fraud incident to get everyone's attention?
Yeah, so first out, a quick shout out to iProve, who came up with those numbers in a recent survey that they conducted based on, I think it was 105 UK financial institution executives. But yeah, it is kind of concerningly low, that number that I'd never even heard of deepfakes. But yeah, I think in answer to your question, I do think that we either have to have one major incident, of a large money transfer, or the number of small transfers and small incidents are going to have to kind of come to a point where people start paying attention.
Right. I mean, I think this is sort of the pattern that we see with these new types of fraud as they emerge, where it becomes something that people are sort of generally aware of. And then all of a sudden you get a major headline somewhere, somebody gets burned. And then everybody else in the industry sort of sits up and says, "Oh, I don't want that next headline to be about me." And coming back to iProve, by the way, iProve won Best of Show at Finovate Europe and will be featured on the podcast here in a couple of weeks as we continue to go through our Best of Show winners interviews. So we'll hear more from them in a little bit. But this is kind of the piece that is sort of, if there is an uplifting aspect to the article that you wrote, it's that it sounds like there are already fintech companies that are able to spot and prevent deepfake attacks. And obviously this is going to continue to evolve as those deepfake attacks get more complicated and more well thought out on the part of the fraudsters. But in your mind, what's preventing those fintech firms from being a bigger part of the solution here?
Yeah, so it's kind of tough to say because there is a lot of research or a lot of conflicting research out there. Some fintechs are, it seems like, on top of this. Jumio just recently created a 3D liveness detection. I don't know from a technical standpoint how that differs from regular liveness detection when it comes to video deepfakes. And Pindrop Security says that it can detect fake audio content with accuracy above 90%. But I think the takeaway here is, while it seems like firms are on top of it, I think that as an industry, we're always one step behind and we don't know what we don't know, or in this case, maybe we don't know what the fraudsters know. So it kind of just depends on whose AI is more powerful, I think.
Yeah, well, I know one of the pieces that we had talked about earlier was that it's still relatively time-consuming, relatively expensive for someone to put together this type of deepfake. And what we've seen so far hasn't yielded the same kind of results, the same kind of big score that some other areas of fraud can allow for. So potentially the economics of it simply aren't there yet. But it is something that I think we'll expect to see more and more of as the technology gets better, as it gets easier for hackers and for fraudsters to create those deep fakes. And one thing that I think we have to kind of think about as in the fintech industry, to what extent has fintech as a whole kind of opened the door for some of these deep fake attacks? I mean, obviously, without online opening, without remote video logins and things like that, this is not really that much of a concern. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the fintech industry has opened the doors to fraud in a lot of different circumstances. You no longer have to walk into a bank and make eye contact with someone there to take money. You can just do it over the phone. It can scale a lot easier and a lot faster as well. If you're just looking at mobile fraud, mobile onboarding and things like that, fraudulent money transfers. So definitely, I don't want to say fintech has created this issue, but it certainly opens the doors to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like whack-a-mole, right? That's what everybody kind of talks about with this. As soon as you sort of close one area where you're vulnerable to a fraudster's attack, other ones seem to be popping up. And not to say that it's not worth it. I think there are obviously benefits that come from this kind of tech advancement, but it is something for the industry as a whole to keep an eye on. And so, in the big picture, there's a lot of different types of fraud and crime threatening the financial industry, phishing, identity theft. Where do you rank deepfakes on that kind of like threatening list right now?
Yeah, this one's kind of tough. I almost feel like I'm not qualified enough to answer. But as I was saying before, there is a lot of conflicting information out there about how big of a deal this is. Some people are saying that it is so expensive and so time consuming for fraudsters to get a hold of an AI when it comes to video or audio deepfakes to create a convincing enough spoof. in order to convince someone to transfer large amounts of money. In other people, according to Pindop Security, they said 5 minutes of audio recording is sufficient enough to create a realistic voice clone. So it doesn't seem like you need that much. You go to one YouTube video of someone talking about, speaking at a conference, and perhaps you can create a realistic enough voice clone for them to transfer large amounts of money. But I guess that's kind of the other side of things. Is I don't think we'll see large amounts of money being transferred. If you were to call me up and say, "Hey, Julie, will you transfer $10? You forgot, but you owe me like a 6-pack of beer," I might be willing to do that. But if you call me up, or a fraudster, posing as you, calls me up and says, "Hey, can you send me $1 million?" That might take something off my head and say, I don't think I owe Greg $1 million. So let me think about that.
Well, you don't think so, but that doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah, that's true.
We can come back to that. But I think as with a lot of these types of things, a lot of it kind of comes down to that same kind of common sense approach that you were just talking about, right? If you do get a phone call from somebody, you now have to have in the back of your mind this idea that it might not actually be the person that you're talking to. And I know some of the things that people recommend are simply to ask unusual questions, slightly unexpected questions, which can trip up a deepfake if it's not prepared to talk about the weather or something like that. So, or even just like you said, if it raises some red flags, maybe that's the kind of next step is to send an email or to look for that outside authentication, that proof that you really are talking to this person. And I think it'll be interesting to see how soon somebody is able to make a big score with this, and what types of headlines that gets, because it does seem like the possibility is there, even if it's not in the immediate future. It doesn't feel like we're that far away. So last question, kind of a fun one. How long before you think we'll see a deepfake demo on the Finovate stage? Is the technology advanced enough that someone can get a quote unquote celebrity up there on the screen to endorse their product? Is this a realistic possibility?
So this is a trick question, because canned videos are not allowed on the Greg, so I don't know.
That's a great answer, Julie. Okay. Well, that actually brings us to the end of our time. But this has been really interesting, and we'll continue to follow this. And Julie, always interesting to see what you're writing about. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the Finovate blog. Look at some of the pieces that Julie has written. You can find her work in other areas as well. But she's really talented and has a really good grasp of what's happening in the fintech industry, grounded in almost a decade of experience at this point. So, Julie, thanks again for joining me on the podcast. Look forward to seeing you again at Finovate Spring.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. This was fun.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.